Yo, what's up guys, and welcome back to a new video. The War Within is finally launching, and with it come our new hero talents being Slayer and Mountain. Now, our playstyles have changed quite a bit, and today we are going to dive in depth on what it is that Slayer has to offer us for both M+ and Raid. Now, before we get into it, it is important that we know what our tier set actually does. So for our 2 set, we have Bloodthirst, increasing the damage of our next rampage by 10%. This is not an amazing tier set design in my opinion. It doesn't really benefit us that much. It gives us some flat damage, but that's about it. Our 4 set does something different, however. When our Raging Blow resets its own cooldown, the damage of our next Bloodthirst is increased by 10%, stacking up to 2 times. Now, once again, it is not a massive increase. It is something nice. I think our tier set is a little undertuned compared to some of the other tier sets that are out, but they are definitely a nice little damage increase. When it comes to M+, we see 2 very competitive and very close together builds, being the Anger Management build and the Reckless Abandon build. Now, starting off with the Anger Management build, we will talent into Thunderous Roar with Thunderous Words, Avatar and Titan's Torment, and double armor to the teeth. Now, you could opt into Uproar at the cost of 1 armor to the teeth for a slight DPS decrease in single target, for a slight increase in AoE. Now, there is an important side note for this, that if you do not align it perfectly, that it will actually be a slight decrease in both. So if you are not entirely confident, I would suggest you take double armor to the teeth, as it is a passive buff and it is very hard to not get the benefits from it. Now, for the right side of the tree, we see a couple of choice nodes, being Powerful Enrage or Frenzied Enrage. For Frenzied Enrage, it does synergize very well with Anger Management, so this is a very solid choice if you want to opt into it. However, the further we go into the expansion and the more secondary stats we will gain, the less power we will get from Frenzied Enrage because of the stats. Now, Powerful Enrage gives you a flat 15% extra damage, and it increases the duration of your enrage by a little bit, so I feel like this is a solid choice, especially for burst windows, and we will probably play Powerful Enrage for most of it. Now, for the bottom capstones, we will see Odin's Fury with Titanic Rage. Odin's Fury does a lot of damage right now. This is also the main reason why we talent into Titan's Torment on the left side of the tree, and you will notice that it just does a massive chunk of your overall damage. Now, obviously, we talent into Anger Management, but surprisingly, we do not talent into Unbridled Ferocity or Depths of Insanity due to the nerfs that they've put through a few weeks before the War Within launched. So, lastly, we have Bladestorm and Unhinged, with me being absolutely excited about Bladestorm. I absolutely love this ability. I hated the fact that they removed it in Dragonflight, and I am very happy that it's back, and boy oh boy, it does clap very hard. Now, for our Slayer talents, we have 2 options. We can play either Brutal Finish or Culling Cyclone, with Brutal Finish being a slight increase in AoE and Culling Cyclone being a slight increase in ST. I prefer to have that little bit more of priority damage, especially when playing Anger Management, because we already have way too much build in AoE compared to our ST, and this kind of compensates for it. Now, on the right side, we can talent into Fierce Follow Through for a little bit more damage on our Bloodthirst, which I personally prefer since we are prioritizing Bloodthirst heavily in our Anger Management build, or we can play Opportunist for a little bit more damage on our Raging Blow, and Raging Blow unfortunately still is very strong due to all the buffs that it gives to other abilities, as for example Bloodthirst and Rampage. Now, moving on to Reckless Abandon. Now, for Reckless Abandon, we barely see any changes, with the key takeaways being that we talent into Reckless Abandon over Anger Management, and that we took Wrath and Fury over Hack and Slash. Now, in this build, there are again some changes that you can follow through in order to gain a little bit more AoE or ST, being the same as with Anger Management, by taking away 1 point in Armor to the Teeth for a point in Uproar. This is fairly situational, because in some dungeons you could prefer to have a little bit more burst on your 45-second windows. A good example of this would be, for example, a Mart on Necrotic Wake, where you have a little bit more damage for the ads, but in general there are not that many changes. Now on the right side of the tree, we are talenting into Wrath and Fury, and the main reason for this is that they changed the way that Reckless Abandon works, being that we will be able to spend both a Bloodbath and a Crushing Blow every time we use a Rampage, rather than only being able to use one of the two. So we will naturally be using a lot more Raging Blows and Crushing Blows, which will be significantly buffed by Wrath and Fury. Now once again, we have talented into Powerful and Rage. I think that Powerful and Rage, especially with Reckless Abandon, has more value, considering that we do not gain CDR from using more abilities, so the value of haste goes a little bit down. Now for the middle side, we are talenting into Culling Cyclone for more ST. You can talent into Brutal Finish for a little bit more AoE, or you can talent into Opportunist here for a little bit more ST, or you can go for Fierce Follow Through. These capstones are pretty close together, and this is mostly up to preference. Now that we've talked about both Reckless Abandon and Anger Management in M+, I wanted to dive a little bit into the AoE rotation, the opener and the ST rotation of Anger Management in M+. Now, for our opener, we will use Recklessness into a charge into Avatar Thunderous Roar into a Bladestorm. Now, depending on how many Meat Cleaver stacks we have left after the Bladestorm, we use Odin's Fury or we use Rampage and Bloodthirst in order to get rid of our Meat Cleaver stacks. Now, after this, you will follow the following rotation. In AoE, we will always want to maintain our Whirlwind buff. So whenever you do not have stacks, you will first start off with a Whirlwind. Whenever you are above 80 Rage, you will use Rampage. You will always use Bloodthirst on cooldown. Whenever you do not have Rampage or Bloodthirst, you will use Sudden Death procs if you have them in order to gain Imminent Demise stacks and build Marks of Execution. And whenever you don't have any of those, you will fill with a Raging Blow. Now to give you an idea of how this looks like in a real scenario, we will use our macro into Rampage into a Bladestorm, and since Unhinged doesn't work on the dummies, I will just follow it up by a Odin's Fury, and we will follow the rotation as I said before. Now, it is important to note that whenever we use this rotation in Anger Management, we will actually desync Bladestorm from our other CDs. Now, whenever they are close together, you can wait for them, but it is not a big deal to send Bladestorm solo. So whenever you have Bladestorm available to you, it is usually a net increase to just send it on cooldown. Now whenever we look at ST, something funny actually happens. Because our Bloodthirst procs Reap the Storm, which is absolutely amazing in AoE, we will prioritize it in AoE. However, in ST it is way less valuable because it does a lot less damage on one target. This means that we actually start prioritizing Raging Blow over Bloodthirst because it buffs up both our Bloodthirst and our Raging Blow by using it. Now, there is one talent that we do need to keep in mind when looking at this, which is Blood Grace. So what we are going to try to do is we are going to use about 2 to 3 Raging Blows in order to guarantee a Bloodthirst before we use it. So the only change in the priority will be that we replace Bloodthirst by Raging Blow, and whenever we have a guaranteed crit on our Bloodthirst, we will start using it. So for the priority, we will use Rampage whenever above 80 Rage, we will use Execute procs whenever we get them, we will use Raging Blow whenever we do not have those available to us, and we will use Bloodthirst when we guarantee a crit with it. Now, we do not use Whirlwind, obviously, in single target unless we have nothing left to press, so this is our last resort. For the opener, it will stay exactly the same, and we will not have to change anything in it, except for the fact that we do not have to upkeep our Meat Cleaver stacks. Now that we've talked a little bit about the Anger Management build, it is time for us to move on to the Reckless Abandon build. And the Reckless Abandon build doesn't change too much compared to the Anger Management build, but there is one massive take to keep in mind from Reckless Abandon, being that we do not care as much about overcapping Rage anymore as we do about using our Crushing Blows and our Bloodbaths. So for our opener, we will once again use Reckless into a charge, into an Avatar, into a Thunderous Roar, but before we want to use our Bladestorm, we want to use a Rampage in order for us to have Bloodbath available to us. Whenever we use Bladestorm after, our Unhinged will actually use that Bloodbath rather than a Bloodthirst, resulting in a net gain in DPS. And afterwards we want to follow it up if we are out of Meat Cleaver stacks by an Odin's Fury. So for the priority coming out of our opener, we will prioritize Crushing Blow whenever it's available to us, Bloodbath whenever it's available to us, into a Rampage whenever we do not have those available to us, into Sudden Death procs, into a Bloodthirst, into a Raging Blow. Now obviously, once again, we will want to upkeep our Whirlwind buffs, so whenever we are out of Meat Cleaver stacks, we will want to use a Whirlwind. Now to give you an idea of how this looks like in practice, we will once again go in, we will Rampage into a Bladestorm, we will use our Odin's Fury afterwards, into a Crushing Blow, Rampage, Crushing Blow, Bloodbath, into a Whirlwind, Rampage, Crushing Blow, Bloodbath, execute, and repeat. Now with this build, once again, we will see that our Bladestorm will not align with our major cooldowns. We will try to use it with our Odin's Fury if we have it available to us, because Odin's Fury procs our avatar. If not, you will send it on CD, with the main takeaway being that you want to use a Rampage before you use your Bladestorm in order to unhinge Bloodbath rather than Bloodthirst. Now it is always good to mention that you will want to have full Meat Cleaver stacks before you use your Bladestorm, as we will cleave Bloodthirsts when doing so, and these will proc Reap the Storm. Now looking into the single target portion of Reckless Abandon, we will do exactly the same opener with one key takeaway changing. We will actually start prioritizing Execute over Rampage for our Marks of Execution and for our cooldown on Bladestorm. Now for the rest of it, we will stick to the same priority as we are using in AoE, with the one change being that we will not use Whirlwind and we will use Bladestorm on cooldown. Once again, with the side note being that if you have Odin's Fury available to you within a couple of seconds of your Bladestorm, that you will want to prioritize using Odin's Fury in order to have that avatar buff available to you during your Bladestorm. Now moving on to the single target portion of this guide. And for our single target raid build, we do not have a whole lot of variety, and we do see one clear winner in terms of DPS. Now the main takeaways from this build are that we are actually turning into Berserker's Torment over Titan's Torment, because in ST we gain less value from Odin's Fury, and we swapped into Onslaught and Tenderize with Reckless Abandon and Unbridled Ferocity. Now we are still playing with Bladestorm and Unhinged because they are just so powerful, but these are the key takeaways. Now, funnily enough, in single target, for a first time in a very long time, we are not talenting into either Massacre or Sudden Death, as they do not gain as much value as Crushing Blow and Bloodbath are this good as they are right now. Now for the middle side on our Slayer, we see that we turned into Opportunist and we opted into Culling Cyclone. I prefer to play Culling Cyclone, but Brutal Finish is also a very good alternative. Now, without any further ado, let's talk about the priority. Now for our opener, we actually want to use Recklessness into a charge into an Onslaught for Enrage. We want to follow it up by a Rampage into our Avatar, into our Champion Spear, into a Bladestorm. Now, because we are playing Reckless Abandon, we do not prioritize spending our Rage as much as we do normally with our Anger Management build. So for the priority coming outside of our opener, we will want to use the following priority list. We will want to always prioritize Crushing Blow. We will want to use Onslaught whenever we don't have that available to us, into a Bloodbath, into a Raging Blow whenever we are under 110 Rage. We will want to use an Execute after that, into a Rampage, into a Raging Blow over 110 Rage, into a Bloodthirst. Now, your very last resort is always going to be a Whirlwind, but I highly doubt that you will ever need to use that in single target with the current priority. Now for our Bladestorm, this will disalign with our major cooldowns, but because we are using our Execute decently frequently, we should be able to get it down enough for us to be able to use it twice every set of cooldowns-ish. It could happen that you will need to hold your cooldowns for a little bit in order for it to align again, but this could be worth. Now it is very important to note that with this build, the only reason we actually use Execute Sudden Death procs is to maintain Ashen Juggernaut. So I will highly recommend you to get an Ashen Juggernaut tracker with your UI. I will leave a link to my Discord down below where you can find all of my UI and copy those if you don't have them yet. Now to show you guys how this actually looks like in a real scenario, we will wreck charge into our things, into Rampage, Macro into Bladestorm, and then we will use the priority as we mentioned before, with Bloodbath being behind our Crushing Blow and with Execute above Rampage. Now because of the ping, I actually used a Raging Blow in between here, which wasn't what I wanted to do, but you get the idea. Now that we've talked about the rotations, both in single target and AoE for both Reckless Abandon and Anger Management, it is time to move on to the gearing section. Now, for our tier set, we will want to prioritize gearing ourselves in our legs, hands, chest and shoulders for our tier set, as they provide us with the best stats. Now for our trinkets in AoE, we will see Arakara Sack Blood and Skarmorok Shard being really viable options, with alternatives being the Mark of Kaldros and the Voidstone. Now these trinkets will both be used in Raid and M+, as they give a very good bonus, with our Arakara Sack Blood being a passive strength increase and our Mark being an active trinket giving us loads of mastery, which always complements Fury Warrior very well. Now for our stats, we will want to prioritize strength into mastery, into haste, into versatility and lastly crit. Now you might want to go a little bit more crit if you want bigger AoE in M+, but generally this is the best stat weight that you can go for. Depending on your gear, however, this could change for every person themselves, so make sure to always simulate your character to see what gear fits you best. Now whenever we get into embellishments, there has been some debate whether it was best to craft 2 embellishments on your weapon, being the Dark Moon Ascensions or going with the Dusk Thread lining. Now I personally recommend you get double Dusk Thread lining, as this will increase your versatility passively whenever you are above 80% HP, and this will complement your DPS, especially your burst, the best. Now lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about what race you should play in terms of DPS and what I think is best. Now, because of our significant burst increase, especially in AoE, I do very much value having the Night Elf ratio available to me. Because we generate a lot of threat because of our insane damage in our opener, it is very nice to have that emergency button in order to get rid of that threat. Now, whenever you are looking for the most DPS, you will most likely want to default towards human, and there is actually an argument to be made to play the new race, being the Earthen, because they will increase your armor passively, and with Armor to the Teeth we will actually be able to gain about 1% extra main stat by playing Earthen. However, this does require you to play 2 points in Armor to the Teeth, and it is somewhat of a gamble, as we do not know if there's going to be future tuning. And that is everything there is to cover about Slayer and how to play it in both AoE and ST, in both M+ and Raid. I will make a guide about Mountain Tane a little bit further down the road as we are going into the launch. If you like this guide, if this helped you, make sure to leave a like, a comment down below what you like the most going into the War Within, and smash that subscribe button. And if you want to ask me some questions, you can always catch me live at twitch.tv/JuventusTV. And I wish to see you guys in the next one.